They laughed at the new nurse like she was invisible. Until the wounded SEAL commander opened his eyes, fought the darkness, and saluted her in a room full of doctors. What kind of hospital turns a life-saving hero into a punchline? And what does that say about the moments you've been dismissed, underestimated, or told to stay in your lane? Picture this Colorado Springs rain tapping the glass outside Summit Ridge Military Trauma Center. Fluorescent lights bleach the hallway. A tired woman in oversized scrubs checks expiration dates twice, while a younger staff smirks behind tablets and perfect hair. She tells herself to keep her head down, just survive the shift. Then, Code Black detonates the quiet. Stay with me because this story isn't just about medicine. It's about ego war and the kind of courage that shows up when nobody's watching. If you're still here, hit like, comment where you're watching from, and don't blink. That salute did not come from nowhere. It belonged to a room that had already decided who mattered and who did not long before the blood hit the floor. Summit Ridge Military Trauma Center sat on the north side of Colorado Springs, tucked between a line of pines and a stretch of highway that carried convoys as often as commuters. From the outside, it looked like every modern hospital built for prestige glass panels, brushed steel-clean geometry. Inside it, breathed like a machine that never powered down. The air always carried the same sharp blend of sanitizer, warmed plastic, and stale coffee. Even the silence had a rhythm punctuated by the soft chirps of monitors and the distant hiss of automatic doors. On Ava Cole's first morning, she paused at the employee entrance long enough to read the plaque embedded in the wall. It listed donors, generals, foundations, names carved into metal like a promise. She adjusted the badge clipped to her scrub top and walked in without looking up again. Ava did not move like the nurses who rushed through the corridors with ponytails swinging and shoes squeaking on polished floors. She moved with a measured pace, economical and deliberate. It was not laziness. It was calculation. She stepped where cords would not snag, where spilled saline would not slick the tile, where a gurney could pass, without her becoming an obstacle. She kept her elbows in. She kept her shoulders relaxed. Her right hand held the edge of her supply cart with a grip that hid a faint tremor when the fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. At the nurse's station, the younger staff clocked her the way people clock a slow car in the fast lane. Paige Larkin looked up first. She had the kind of polished face that suggested she lived in front of mirrors. Her scrubs fit like they were tailored. Her badge reel was glittery shaped like a stethoscope heart. Paige's eyes swept Ava's hair, her plain bun, her loose scrubs, the slight hitch in her step. The glance lasted less than a second, but it landed with the accuracy of a thrown blade. New Paige said not as a greeting, more like a diagnosis. Ava set her bag down and nodded once. Ava Cole, float nurse, nights and weekends. A charge nurse with tired eyes and a jaw clenched from years of swallowing conflict gave a quick smile. Welcome to Summit Ridge. You'll be in Trauma 4 to start. Stocking cleanups, whatever we need. Ava did not flinch. Understood. The charge nurse started to say more, then stopped when a shadow fell across the counter. Dr. Cameron Wexler leaned in like he belonged to the building's architecture. He was in his early 30s, hair perfect white coat, perfectly pressed, a tablet tucked under his arm like an extension of his body. His ID tag read, Chief Resident in bold letters. Even the way he stood announced command. He scanned the station eyes flicking over names, faces, screens. His gaze touched Ava for a moment and slid away as if she were part of the furniture. Paige brightened. Morning, Dr. Wexler. Wexler's mouth curved. Morning, Paige. Then to the charge nurse. Do we have the new hire? Ava spoke before the charge nurse could. That's me. Wexler finally looked at her. He did not study her the way a physician studies a patient. He studied her the way a man assesses a risk to his comfort. You're the transfer, he said. Yes. From where? A regional facility. Wexler's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's vague. Ava held his gaze. I've worked trauma. Wexler smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Summit Ridge is trauma. Ava nodded again, as if he had simply stated the weather. Wexler turned to Paige and Dr. Jonah Vance, a second-year resident hovering nearby with a coffee cup. Jonah's posture was alert but hesitant, like a man always half a second behind the room's tempo. Wexler spoke casually but loud enough for the station to hear. 500 says she lasts less than a week. Paige's laugh came too quickly. That's not fair. It's generous, Jonah said, not smiling, then added, not my bet. Wexler's eyes stayed on Ava, waiting for a reaction. Ava did not give him one. She opened the assignment board, copied her shift details into a small notebook instead of her phone, and capped her pen with a soft click. Wexler's smile sharpened. She's got the notebook. That tells me everything. Ava stepped away with her cart. She heard Paige's voice behind her, low and amused. Maybe she'll write us a story. The trauma corridor was colder than the rest of the hospital, air-conditioned to keep infection down and nerves taut. Along the walls, framed photos showed ribbon cuttings and visiting dignitaries. In one, Wexler stood beside a state senator with an arm around his shoulder, both smiling like men posing for a future they expected to own. Ava rolled the cart into Trauma 4 and started with the simplest tasks. She checked saline bags, dates, seals. She lined up pressure dressings by size. She inspected the crash cart for missing blades and expired meds. She opened the airway drawer and refilled it, arranging everything by instinct. She didn't need labels. Her hands knew where a size 7 tube should sit. 2 nurses passed in the doorway. Is that her? One whispered. The new one, the other said. They say she came from some tiny place, like farm roads and broken arms. Here. Apparently HR is feeling charitable. Ava kept working. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around a package of gauze until the plastic crinkled. The work was familiar enough to be comforting. Supplies did not have opinions. Dates did not laugh. She could control the inventory, even if she could not control the way people looked at her when she walked down the hallway. By her 3rd shift, she understood the hospital's unspoken rules. The doctors lived in a world of status, speed, and clean confidence. They did not like pauses. They did not like questions that came from below them. They moved fast because they could, and because speed looked like competence when you were being watched. The nurses were split. Some were older, worn down, focused on surviving their hours and going home. Some were young, hungry, eager to be seen by the right people. Paige was the second kind. Paige hovered near Wexler like a satellite, laughing at his jokes, anticipating his needs, handing him tools before he asked, as if she could earn rank through proximity. Ava was not invited into any of that. She got the messes. She got the late-night cleanups after trauma cases. She got the overflow assignments that required patience rather than glory. On the whiteboard, her name was written last, always in smaller letters than the others. The first time she questioned an order, it was not dramatic. A soldier came in with a deep laceration to his forearm from a training accident. The wound was dirty with grit and blood. Jonah ordered antibiotics. Paige started hanging the bag. Ava stepped closer, glanced at the label, then at the patient's chart. He's allergic to cephalosporins. Paige's hand froze. No, he's not. Ava tapped the chart. The allergy was listed in plain text, easy to miss if you trusted your memory more than your eyes. Paige's face tightened. Well, that's old information. Ava did not argue. She simply reached up and closed the clamp before the medication could drip. Jonah blinked, then swallowed. Good catch. Wexler appeared in the doorway at the tail end of it, as if summoned by any moment that threatened to make someone else look capable. What's going on? He asked. Nothing, Paige said quickly. Just a chart note. Ava looked at Wexler. He's allergic. We should switch. Wexler stared at her for a beat, then at the chart, then back. Fine. Switch it. The words were casual, but the look was a warning. After the patient was stabilized, Wexler pulled Paige aside in the hall. Ava heard the low, sharp edge of his voice. Don't let her undermine you, he said. Ava kept walking. That night in the break room, a nurse named Tessa sat across from Ava and studied her hands. Your tremor, Tessa said softly. Not cruel. You okay? Ava stirred her coffee. The spoon clinked against the cup. It's nothing. Tessa hesitated. Neurologic. Ava's eyes lifted just enough to stop the question from continuing. It's old. Tessa nodded, accepting the boundary. This place eats people. Ava almost smiled, I noticed. The break room television played muted cable news. A general stood at a podium speaking about readiness and resilience. The captions crawled across the bottom of the screen. Ava did not look at the general's face. She watched the hands, the posture, the way the uniform sat across shoulders. A sudden wave of memory rose like heat off pavement. Helicopter rotors, dust in her teeth, someone's blood on her gloves that would not come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. Ava set her coffee down and pressed her fingertips to the edge of the table until the feeling passed. She had not come to Summit Ridge for recognition. She had come because the hospital's retirement package was stable, because the city was far enough from certain names, because a place built on routine could let her disappear. At her apartment, she lived like a person who expected to move quickly if she had to. Everything had a place. Keys on a hook, shoes lined up, medical books on one shelf, all with cracked spines, a small toolkit under the sink, a knee brace in the top drawer, a folded olive field jacket hanging in the closet behind a row of civilian coats. The fabric faded, the stitching worn smooth in places like it had been grabbed in the dark. She slept on the left side of the bed, back to the wall, facing the door. When she woke in the middle of the night, heart racing, Steiny did not turn on the light. She sat up and listened, counting breaths until her pulse slowed. In the bathroom, she kept a small bottle of anti-inflammatory pills and a tube of scar cream she never used. A jagged scar ran along her knee, pale and ropey under the harsh light. Another line marked the side of her ribcage, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She showered fast, as if water were something to endure instead of enjoy, and left for work before dawn, when the roads were empty and the sky looked bruised. At Summit Ridge, she worked her shifts, took her hits, and said as little as possible. Wexler's disdain became an ambient sound like the hospital's ventilation system. He found reasons to correct her in front of others, small humiliations designed to remind the room of the hierarchy. "Hey, Ava," he called once across the nurse's station, not looking up from his tablet. "We don't do rural clinic pacing here. You can pick it up." Ava replied evenly, "Yes, doctor." Paige laughed with him. Jonah looked down at his shoes. On another shift, Ava insisted on counting narcotics twice. Paige rolled her eyes. "You're going to make us late," Paige said. Ava did not look up. "Late is better than wrong." Paige leaned close, voice honeyed. "You ever worry you're not built for this pace?" Ava's gaze met hers. "I worry about the patient." Paige's smile thinned. She backed away as if Ava had burned her without touching. The trauma unit respected speed. Ava respected precision. In that clash, she was always going to look slow. But there were moments, short and sharp, when the mask slipped and people caught something underneath. One evening, a young private came in with heat exhaustion from training delirious thrashing on the gurney. His vitals flickered like a bad signal. A resident started to speak in rapid jargon. The soldier's eyes rolled, panic rising. Ava stepped to the side of the bed, lowered her voice, and spoke directly to him. "Look at me," she said. "Breathe with me. In through the nose, out through the mouth." The private's gaze locked on hers. He obeyed without understanding why. His shoulders loosened a fraction. The panic eased. Jonah watched her surprised. When the patient stabilized, Jonah approached Ava near the supply closet. "That was good," he said quietly. "You handled him like you've done it before." Ava's hands kept moving, restocking dressings. "People panic when they can't breathe." Jonah nodded, then hesitated. "Where did you work before?" Ava did not answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on the shelves, places that needed help. Jonah accepted that too. But something in his expression shifted. Not trust. Not yet. Curiosity mixed with respect, dampened by the knowledge that respect for the wrong person could cost you in a place like this. The hospital's leadership reinforced Wexler's power in subtle ways. When he spoke, administrators listened. When he walked through the lobby, donor plaques seemed to glint brighter. When he made a decision, the nursing supervisors avoided contradicting him unless the stakes were undeniable. Mark Halden, the hospital administrator, was not a clinician. He was a man who spoke in numbers and contracts. He wore suits that looked expensive even under fluorescent lighting, and he always smelled faintly of cologne that tried too hard. Ava saw him once in a hallway conversation with Diane Kessler, the director of nursing. Halden's voice carried through the open door of an office. The DoD contract renewal is next quarter. We need clean outcomes and clean optics. Diane's voice was calm but tired. We need safe staffing. We need the contract, Halden said. And we need our golden boy to keep shining. Wexler's name brings donors. He brings prestige. Prestige keeps the lights on. Ava walked past without making a sound like she was trained to do. Diane noticed her anyway. Later, Diane found Ava in Trauma 4 and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You're quiet, Diane said. Ava kept counting supplies. I'm here to work. Diane watched her for a moment. You're trauma certified. Yes. And you've done more than most nurses your age. Ava's jaw tightened at the phrase, your age. But Diane did not say it with malice. Diane continued, Wexler can be difficult. Ava looked up. I've had difficult. Diane almost smiled, then glanced down the hallway as if checking for eavesdroppers. Just don't give him a reason. Ava nodded, I don't. Diane's eyes lingered on Ava's hands. The tremor was barely visible, but it was there. If you need accommodations, we can talk. Ava's gaze held steady. I don't need accommodations. I need a schedule. Diane gave a small nod as if she understood more than she was saying and walked away. As the days stacked, the mockery did not stop, it just changed shape. It became a nickname, whispered when Ava passed. It became tasks assigned to her with false sweetness. It became Paige asking her to double-check things Paige should have checked herself just to make Ava look slow. Ava took it all without outward reaction. Not because it did not hurt, because reacting would feed them, because she had learned a long time ago that the first person to lose control in a hostile room was the first person to lose. On a late shift, Jonah found her in the medication room, staring at a vial in her hand. He paused in the doorway. You okay? He asked. Ava set the vial down with care. This brand changed its packaging. Jonah stepped closer. That's it. Ava glanced up. A label can kill someone. Jonah swallowed. He looked younger in that harsh light, less certain. Sometimes I feel like I'm sprinting and I don't know where I'm going. Ava's voice softened just slightly, then slowed down long enough to see. Jonah nodded as if he wanted to say more, but did not. He left with his coffee untouched. The next time Wexler saw Ava speaking to Jonah, he made sure to interrupt. Vance Wexler called sharp and bright. Stop chatting. We have real work. Jonah straightened instantly. Yes, doctor. Wexler's gaze flicked over Ava again. And you? Keep to your tasks. Ava did not bristle. She simply said, yes, doctor, and went back to work, the same phrase, the same calm tone, offering him nothing to hook into. But inside something tightened. Not rage, not yet. Ava's life had become a narrow corridor. Work, home, sleep, repeat. She did not go out. She did not drink. She did not keep friends. She did not answer calls from numbers she did not recognize. Once a week, she drove to a thrift store across town and bought cheap mugs and cheap plants, small harmless things that made her apartment feel less like a bunker. She always chose a plant that looked half dead, like it needed someone patient enough to keep it alive. On a Saturday morning, she sat at her kitchen table with that plant and a tiny bottle of water. The radio murmured local news. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. She stared at it, thumb hovering, then set the phone face down. In the closet behind the coats, the field jacket hung silent. The patches were still there, but the names meant nothing to the civilian world. Ava had once thought that was the point. At the hospital, the civilian world pressed in anyway. The trauma unit did not care about your past. It cared about how fast you moved, how clean your scrubs looked, how well you fit the image. Ava did not fit. One evening, Paige cornered her in the supply room. You know why you're getting the trash shifts? Paige asked, arms folded, voice low. Because you make everyone nervous. Ava placed a box of gauze on the shelf. I make you nervous. Paige's cheeks flushed. You're always watching like you're waiting for something. Ava's eyes met Paige's. I'm watching the patients. Paige leaned closer, the smell of perfume too sweet in the sterile air. You ever think maybe you're not wanted here? Ava did not step back. I don't need to be wanted. Paige scoffed and turned away, but her shoulders were tense. She was used to people flinching. Ava returned to her cart and rolled it into the hallway. As she passed the nurse's station, Wexler was speaking to Halden and a man in a crisp uniform. A military liaison, likely. Their voices were quiet, but Ava caught fragments. Special operations, Wexler said. We're ready for anything. Halden nodded, smiling. Summit Ridge is a flagship. The liaison's eyes were flat professional. Readiness is tested when it counts. Wexler smiled bigger. That's when I thrive. Ava kept walking, but the liaison's words hung in her mind. Tested when it counts. In Trauma 4, she checked the airway drawer again. She checked the chest tube kit. She checked the needle catheters, then checked them again. Her tremor faded as her hands moved through familiar sequences. Precision soothed her. When her shift ended, she stood by the employee exit for a moment, watching the night through the glass. Rain tapped the pavement outside. A patrol car rolled by. In the distance, a plane crossed the sky, its lights blinking against the dark. Ava's reflection in the glass looked older than she felt. Lines around the eyes. Gray threaded through her hair. A body that carried old damage. She thought about the way Wexler had said real work. She thought about Paige's question, not wanted. She exhaled slowly and pushed through the door into the cold. At home, she removed her shoes and set them in their place. She washed her hands longer than necessary. She stood under the shower until the water ran cool. When she climbed into bed, she kept her eyes on the door. Sleep came in fragments. A helicopter blade thumped in the distance of her mind. A voice shouted a name she had not used in years. She woke with her heart hammering and swallowed a sound before it could escape. In the morning, she went back. On her way into the trauma unit, she passed Wexler in the hall. He was laughing with a group of residents, confidence on display, like a badge. When he saw Ava, he raised his voice just enough. Hey, Ava. Expiration dates today or tomorrow. A resident laughed. Paige laughed loudest. Ava did not stop walking. Always today, she said without looking back. The laughter faltered for half a breath, then recovered. Wexler's smile tightened as if he had missed his mark. In the hours that followed, the hospital ran through its usual cycles. Minor traumas, consults, paperwork. A motor vehicle collision that brought in a teenager with a broken collarbone and a terrified mother. A training injury with a fractured ankle. The machine kept breathing. Then near the end of Ava's shift, the air changed. It was subtle at first. A tightening in the unit's collective posture. A pause in conversations that had nothing to do with medicine. A glance toward the ceiling speakers, as if everyone felt something moving before it arrived. Ava stood at the nurse's station, signing off a chart when the overhead system clicked. The first tone hit low and piercing. Then the second tone followed, and the trauma unit snapped to attention, as if someone had pulled a wire tight. The first tone hit low, sharp, and unmistakable. The second tone followed, and the entire trauma unit tightened like a fist. Every head turned toward the ceiling speakers. Then the voice came through, clipped and practiced with the kind of calm that only exists when somebody is already running. Code Black. Code Black. Special Operations Transport. Estimated time of arrival, 3 minutes. Surgical teams report to trauma bays 1 through 4. Blood bank, activate massive transfusion protocol. This is not a drill. For half a second, the hospital froze in the space between routine and catastrophe. Then it moved. Chairs scraped back. Tablets were snatched up. Gloves snapped on. The air filled with footsteps and short commands, the language of people trying to outrun death by organizing it. Ava stood at the nurse's station with a pen still in her hand. The ink had not dried on her last note. Her pulse did not spike the way it used to. Instead, something older and colder settled into her chest, a familiar weight that made everything else quiet. Across the station, Cameron Wexler looked like he had been waiting for this all day. His posture changed first. His shoulders squared. His voice sharpened. The amused golden boy vanished, and the commander took his place, as if the emergency had unlocked the version of him he most wanted the world to see. "All right, Wexler," called loud enough to cut through the scramble. "Listen up. We have incoming from Peterson. Special operations. That means high value and high trauma. Page, get blood bank on the line. Tell them we want 6 units ready and do not make me ask twice. Vance, Bay 1. Prep thoracotomy tray and intubation setup. Tessa, Bay 2. I want airway carts staged. Move." People moved fast and obedient. Wexler's eyes landed on Ava like a final step in a checklist. "And you?" he said, his tone dropping into something almost casual. "Cole. Stay out of the way. Go manage the waiting room or restock supplies. Do something useful that does not involve being in my trauma bay." Ava met his gaze. "I am trauma certified," she said. Wexler did not blink. "I do not care what certificate you have," he snapped. "This is not a sprained ankle. This is a special operations extraction that went sideways. High-velocity rounds, blast injuries, shrapnel. You will trip over cords, freeze up, and get someone killed. So take your careful little notebook and get out of my line of sight." For a moment, the nurse's station went oddly quiet, like the unit was listening for Ava's answer. Paige stood behind Wexler with her phone pressed to her ear, already half smiling, already thrilled by the drama. Jonah Vance glanced at Ava, and then away, as if eye contact might be interpreted as loyalty. Ava felt the old impulse to push forward, the instinct to step into the heat, the reflex to protect the patient instead of protecting the pecking order. She swallowed it. Not because Wexler was right, but because choosing the wrong moment to fight him would cost time. And time was oxygen. "All right," Ava said evenly. Wexler dismissed her with a flick of his eyes and turned away. His attention was already on the ambulance bay doors, on the incoming spectacle, on the chance to be seen. Ava stepped back toward the scrub sinks at the edge of Trauma Bay 4, close enough to hear, close enough to move, if she needed to, far enough that Wexler would not feel challenged. She rested her hand on the counter. Her fingers trembled faintly. Not from fear, not yet. More like a warning from her nerves, a whisper from old damage that the world was about to accelerate. The overhead lights hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a gurney wheel squealed. The scent of antiseptic mixed with a sharper smell that always arrived before the patient did the metallic promise of blood. Then the double doors crashed open. Noise flooded the bay. Shouts overlapped. Boots pounded tile. Radios crackled. A medic's voice rose above the rest, raw with urgency. Coming in hot, coming in hot. The first gurney slammed through, pushed by 2 paramedics with faces tight and wet from rain. Male 20s, blast injury, partial amputation, left leg, 1 called. Tourniquet on time noted. Pressure dropping. They rolled him straight to Bay 2. The second gurney followed. Female 30s, shrapnel to abdomen, possible internal bleed, another voice shouted. BP 90, systolic heart rate 140. Bay 3. Then the third. Male 20s, penetrating trauma 2 GSW to lower chest and upper abdomen. Bay 4, close to where Ava stood. The room was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Hands moved with purpose. Nurses cut away clothing. Residents snapped questions. Respiratory therapy hauled in equipment like a traveling arsenal. Ava's eyes tracked everything without seeming to track anything. She watched the flow, the bottlenecks, the ways people collided when they tried to do the same job at the same time. The incoming wave should have been the whole story. It was not. Because the fourth gurney came in escorted by a wall of military police. The MPs moved differently than hospital security. Their eyes scanned corners. Their hands stayed near belts. They did not look impressed by the hospital. They looked prepared to treat it as another unsecured zone. 2 flight medics flanked the gurney, one squeezing a bag valve mask, the other pressing gauze to a wound at the base of the neck. Blood seeped through the medic's gloves, dark and thick, pooling in the folds of torn fabric. A voice cut through the bay like a blade. HVT, Commander Nathan Riker. Navy SEAL. Multiple injuries. Sniper round upper thorax. Shrapnel to neck. BP 70/40 and dropping. Everything around the gurney shifted. People did not say it out loud, but you could feel it. The unit recalibrated. This was not just a patient. This was a symbol, a name with weight, a life that would come with consequences if it ended on their watch. Wexler was there instantly. Bay 1, he ordered. Move. His hands were already gloved. His face was focused in the way cameras loved. His voice had that theatrical edge that sounded like leadership to anyone who did not know the difference between confidence and competence. They rolled Riker into Trauma Bay 1. Ava followed at a distance, not running, not rushing, moving like she knew exactly where she could stand without being seen and still see everything. In Bay 1, the lights seemed brighter. The air seemed colder. The monitors were louder, as if the room itself was aware it was being tested. Riker on the bed looked built from rock even as blood drained him pale. Broad shoulders, thick neck, arms corded with muscle. The kind of man who looked like he belonged outdoors, not under fluorescent lights. His tactical vest had been cut away. His chest was slick with blood. A jagged wound sat high on the right side, just below the collarbone, a small hole with an enormous price. Near his neck, shrapnel had torn the skin open in a ragged line. His eyes fluttered, fighting to roll back. His jaw clenched as if he refused to surrender consciousness without a fight. A flight medic rattled off vitals. Heart rate 150. O2 sat 78 with bagging. Breath sounds decreased on the right. Trachea. I think it is midline, but he is swelling fast. We have a line, we are pushing fluids. He is crashing. Wexler latched onto the neck wound. Clamp that he snapped. That bleed is going to drown him. Suction. Give me suction. A resident reached in with clamps. Blood sprayed, then slowed. Riker coughed a wet, ugly sound. The monitor beeped faster. Airway, Wexler said. We need the airway now. Prep for intubation. Respiratory moved in. Jonah stepped to the head of the bed. Hands ready, eyes wide, trying to match Wexler's speed. Riker thrashed. Even half-dead, his survival instinct came out like violence. He swung an arm up and grabbed Jonah's wrist with a grip that made Jonah's knuckles whiten. Jonah hissed through his teeth. He is strong. No kidding, a nurse muttered. Wexler leaned in, impatient. Restrain him. He is fighting the tube. Two staff tried to hold Riker's arms down. Riker twisted shoulders, lifting off the bed. His eyes flashed open, unfocused, furious like a cornered animal. Push paralytics, Wexler ordered. Succinylcholine. Now. A syringe was handed over. Wexler nodded at Jonah. Tube him. Jonah positioned the laryngoscope. Riker bucked again. Ava watched from her spot near the scrub sinks. The room around her blurred into motion, but her eyes narrowed on details. She did not watch the blood on the floor. She watched the rise and fall of the chest. The left side moved shallow, but present. The right side barely moved at all. She watched the neck veins distended even with low blood pressure, an odd contradiction that made her skin prickle. She watched the trachea. It was subtle, easy to miss under swelling and grime. But the airway structure was not centered. It leaned left, a quiet drift that suggested pressure building where it had no business building. She watched the monitor. Oxygen saturation refused to climb despite aggressive bagging. Heart rate climbed. Blood pressure narrowed. Ava's mouth dried. Her hand tightened on the counter edge. The tremor in her fingers steadied as her focus sharpened. That always happened. In calm moments, her nerves betrayed her. In crisis, her body remembered what it was built to do. Wexler was still staring at the neck wound, like it was the whole war. Ava heard herself speak before she decided to. Doctor, she said, her voice carrying farther than she intended. He has a tension pneumothorax. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a statement, clean and precise. For a fraction of a second, the room did not react because they were all still moving. Then Wexler turned his head slowly, as if irritated by a fly. What did you say? He asked. Ava stepped forward one pace, still careful, still controlled. Tension pneumothorax, she repeated. Look at his trachea. It is shifting left. His right chest is not moving. You are trying to intubate a collapsed lung. You are going to make it worse. Wexler's eyes widened, not with understanding, but with anger. Get her out of here, he snapped to nobody in particular. Security. A nurse glanced toward the doorway, but did not move. There was no security in the bay. There was only staff trying not to die professionally. Wexler leaned closer to Ava like intimidation could change anatomy. "I am the chief resident," he said, voice low and sharp. "You are a nurse assigned to restocking carts. You do not diagnose in my trauma bay." Ava did not raise her voice. She did not posture. She simply turned her gaze back to the patient and spoke into the room because she needed someone else to look. "Decreased breath sounds on the right," she said. "Distended neck veins. Hypotension. Tracheal deviation. He is obstructing." Jonah paused, laryngoscope hovering. His eyes flicked to Riker's chest. "Wait," Jonah murmured. He reached with his free hand and placed it on the right side of the chest, feeling movement that was not there. His face changed, subtle but real. He leaned in and listened with a stethoscope. Then he looked up at Wexler. "Dr. Wexler," Jonah said, voice tight. "I do not hear breath sounds on the right." Wexler's jaw clenched. For a moment, it was clear the evidence hit him. You could see the calculation. The speed at which he evaluated the risk of being wrong versus the risk of admitting someone else had been right. In a room where hierarchy was oxygen, admitting he had missed something in front of staff was its own kind of suffocation. He stared at Riker's neck wound again, as if the bleeding could distract him from the truth pressing against the ribs. "It is swelling from shrapnel," Wexler said, tone final. "We secure the airway first." Ava took another step forward. "No," she said. Wexler's head snapped toward her. "What did you just say?" Ava's voice dropped deeper, steadier, a sound that did not match her age or her plain scrubs. "Do not intubate until you decompress," she said. "He is crashing from pressure. You will not be able to ventilate him." Wexler's nostrils flared. He looked past her, addressing the room like a judge. "Everybody hears this," he said. "This is what happens when people play combat medic on television." A few staff shifted uncomfortably. Paige hovered near the doorway, eyes glittering with the pleasure of watching someone get put in their place. Wexler nodded at Jonah. "Proceed," he ordered. "Tube him. Push the drugs." Jonah hesitated. His grip on the laryngoscope tightened. He looked at Riker's face, then at the monitor, then back to Wexler. Dr. Jonah said carefully, "His saturation is not improving." Wexler leaned closer to Jonah, voice cold. "Tube him," he repeated. "Now." The paralytic went in. Riker's thrashing slowed, then stopped. His eyes fluttered, then went blank. For a second, the stillness looked like relief. Then the monitor dipped. The oxygen number refused to climb. The chest on the right remained stubbornly still. Ava felt time compress the way it did in places where mistakes became permanent. Her eyes dropped to the open tray on a side table. She saw the equipment laid out like a promise. Gauze, scalpels, forceps, and a sealed package containing a needle catheter. Her fingers flexed once. The tremor vanished. She stepped closer, not fast, not frantic, just certain, moving into the tight orbit of the bed, as if the space had always been hers. Ava felt the room press against her as she stepped into the tight circle around the bed. Bodies shifted, shoulders, bumped gloves, slick with sweat and blood. The air tasted metallic and hot beneath the cold blast of ventilation. Commander Nathan Riker lay still, now paralyzed by medication, but his skin had taken on a grayish cast that made him look carved out of stone and already half gone. Jonah's laryngoscope hovered at the edge of Riker's mouth, his eyes flicking between the monitor and Wexler's face. "SAT is 76, Tessa called, voice tight. Dropping. Respiratory squeezed the bag harder. The chest barely rose on the right. Wexler leaned in at the head of the bed, jaw clenched as if willpower could force oxygen into a lung that was not taking it. "Tube him," he said again, louder now. "We secure the airway. That is the priority." Ava's gaze stayed on the commander's chest. She could almost see the pressure building inside invisible air, turning lethal because it had nowhere to go. She had seen this exact stillness before, in places where a mistake meant someone died in the dust, while radios kept crackling like nothing had changed. She reached toward the side table and tore open the catheter package with calm hands. The plastic split with a sharp snap. Wexler saw it. "What are you doing?" he barked. Ava did not answer him. She moved to Riker's right side and placed her left hand flat, on his upper chest. She felt the ribs beneath skin and muscle, felt the lack of movement, the stubborn rigidity. Her fingers slid with deliberate precision, counting spaces. Second intercostal, mid-clavicular line. Her body remembered the map like a prayer. Jonah's eyes widened. "Ava," he whispered, not as a warning, but as a plea for sanity. "We do not have orders." Ava looked up once, just enough to meet Jonah's gaze. "We have a dying man," she said, voice low. "Hold still." Wexler lunged toward her, rage lighting his face. "Stop her! Someone stop her!" A nurse hesitated, hands hovering in the air, caught between protocol and the fact that the patient's oxygen number had started flashing. Wexler reached for Ava's wrist. Ava shifted her weight and blocked him with her shoulder and elbow, a compact movement that used structure instead of strength. It was not a shove. It was an intercept. Wexler stumbled back into the instrument tray. Metal clattered onto the floor. A clamp skittered under the bed and disappeared. The room made a single, collective sound. A sharp inhale, as if everyone had just realized they were watching something they could not take back. Wexler's face twisted with humiliation. He opened his mouth to shout. Ava drove the catheter needle into the chest. The moment it entered, there was a sound that did not belong in a hospital. A hiss that carried through the bay like a warning shot. Pressurized air erupted out in a violent rush, sharp and wet, as if the body itself had been holding its breath for too long. The monitor beep changed. Not slower at first, just different. A shift in tone that made every ear in the room snap toward it. "Sat 80, Tessa said, startled. 83, respiratory, added voice rising. Riker's chest moved. The right side lifted, shallow, but real, like a door cracking open. Then Riker gasped. It was a ragged, massive intake of air that pulled him back from the edge. His eyes snapped open wide and furious, then focused into something else as the suffocation released. Jonah stared at the catheter like it was a magic trick and a felony at the same time. "Oh my God," Paige whispered from the doorway. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, mascara already smudging from the humidity and panic. Wexler pushed himself up off the floor, face splattered with a fine mist of blood. His eyes locked onto Ava with pure hatred. "You just assaulted me," he said. His voice, shook, not with fear, but with the shock of being made small in front of witnesses. "You performed an unauthorized procedure on a high-value military patient." Ava's hand stayed steady on the catheter hub. She did not look at Wexler. She looked at the commander. Riker's pupils were blown wide, vision swimming. He tried to speak and could not. His lips moved around a soundless word. Ava leaned closer, her voice shifting into something gentler without losing its steel. "Breathe," she said. "In, out. You are safe. You are at Summit Ridge." Riker's gaze locked onto her face. His eyes narrowed, not in pain, but recognition fighting through sedation. He lifted his right hand off the sheet with tremendous effort, fingers trembling. Wexler stepped forward, trying to reclaim the room. "Get away from him," he hissed at Ava. "This is my patient." Riker's hand did not reach for Wexler. It reached for Ava's sleeve. Not to push her away, but to anchor himself. His fingers curled into the fabric like it was the last solid thing in a world that was dissolving. He pulled her slightly closer, his grip surprisingly strong for a man who had been seconds from dying. Then he whispered a word. It came out cracked and hoarse, but clear enough. "Angel." The bay went silent again, deeper this time. Wexler's expression flickered. Confusion cut through his anger like a blade. What Wexler said, "Do you know her?" Riker did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Ava. His hand released her sleeve and rose slowly with a stiffness that spoke of pain and discipline. He brought his fingers to his brow in a formal salute held a fraction longer than a reflex, like a message. Ava did not mirror it with a sharp return. She did not perform. She simply nodded once the smallest acknowledgement. "At ease, Commander," she said. "Let us work." Riker's eyelids fluttered. His body finally loosened as anesthesia pulled him back under. The faintest hint of relief settled across his face, the way a storm passes and the air changes. For a breath, nobody moved. Then the trauma base snapped back into motion, but it was different now. The chaos had a new center of gravity. Jonah cleared his throat, voice shaky. "We need definitive management." Chest tube. Ava nodded. Prep the kit. Wexler tried to assert himself, stepping in with a sharp motion. I am running this case. Ava turned her head toward him slowly. The timid nurse persona he had built in his mind was gone. Her eyes were flat, cold, and unafraid. Her voice dropped low enough that only the nearest staff could hear, but it carried with absolute authority. He is stable because I decompressed him, she said. Fix the neck. I will place the chest tube. If you put your hands in the wrong place again while he is dying, I will remove them. Wexler stared at her stunned. His mouth opened, then closed. His ego wrestled with the reality that the entire bay had watched him miss something deadly. He settled on what he could still control. The hierarchy, the paperwork, the consequences after the blood was cleaned up. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. Do it. And when this is over, you will answer for what you did. Ava did not respond. She focused on the work. She prepped the chest tube like she had done it for years, movements clean, minimal, efficient. Drapes placed, skin cleaned, local anesthetic, a small incision. The blunt dissection that felt wrong to anyone who had not done it under pressure. Her hands did not tremble now. They were steady as stone. Jonah assisted eyes wide, trying to keep up. He handed instruments without being asked. He watched her technique with the focus of someone realizing the person he had overlooked was operating on a level he had never seen. Tessa monitored vitals, respiratory-adjusted settings. A nurse suctioned blood at the neck while Wexler worked to control the shrapnel damage. The commander's oxygen climbed into the 90s. His blood pressure crept up fragile, but present. When the chest tube was in and the seal bubbled properly, Ava exhaled once, slow and quiet. She secured dressings and stepped back, making room without surrendering control. Wexler finished at the neck, hands quick, face rigid. He avoided looking at Ava, but his jaw pulsed with contained fury. They transferred Riker to the operating room within minutes, a rolling convoy of staff and equipment. The MPs stayed close, scanning corridors, radios murmuring. The hospital around them continued to function, but everything they passed felt smaller, lesser, like the building itself understood it had just been judged. In the operating room, under brighter lights and deeper anesthesia, the fight became slower and more technical. Surgeons worked the injuries with controlled precision. The commander's body was repaired as much as it could be stitched and drained and stabilized. Ava stayed present and useful. She did not seek praise. She did not linger where her presence would provoke Wexler. She did her tasks and stepped back the way she always did when the mission required the room to move smoothly. But Wexler did not forget the elbow, the hiss, the salute. When the final dressings were in place and the commander was wheeled toward the ICU, Wexler peeled off his gloves and looked at Ava like he was looking at a threat that needed to be contained. You will come with me, he said. Ava's expression did not change. To the ICU. To administration, Wexler snapped. Now. The adrenaline drained out of the air as soon as they left the operating wing. The hallways outside were quieter, the lights softer, the smell less metallic. The normal world waited just beyond the trauma doors, and in that normal world, Wexler knew how to win. They led Ava through corridors that grew more polished as they approached the administrative wing. Carpet replaced tile. Artwork replaced medical posters. The silence felt expensive. Ava's knee ached with every step. The tremor returned faintly at her fingertips as the crisis left her bloodstream. She could feel her body shifting back into civilian mode, the old injuries making themselves known again. In a conference room with a mahogany table and leather chairs, Mark Halden waited with a folder in front of him. Diane Kessler sat beside him, shoulders tight, expression troubled. Wexler had already changed out of his blood-stained scrubs into a crisp suit. His hair was perfect again. He looked like the version of himself that belonged in donor photos. Ava was still in her scrubs, stained with the commander's blood. There was a rust-colored smear on her sleeve that no amount of scrubbing would remove. Halden did not invite her to sit. He gestured to a chair without warmth. Ava Cole. He began, voice careful. We are addressing a serious incident that occurred in Trauma Bay 1. Wexler leaned back as if the room were built for him. Gross misconduct, he said, savoring the phrase. Diane's eyes flicked to Ava's stained sleeve, then away. Halden opened the folder. Ms. Cole, we have an allegation that you physically struck Dr. Wexler. Ava looked at her hands on her lap. They shook faintly like a metronome. The tremor looked worse under the soft lighting exposed now without the distraction of action. I blocked him, Ava said. He was reaching across a sterile field while the patient was crashing. Wexler gave a soft laugh. It carried contempt, not humor. Listen to that language, he said to Halden. Blocked him. Sterile field. She thinks she is the authority. Halden glanced between them, Dr. Wexler. Wexler leaned forward, elbows on the table. His bruise was already forming on his chest beneath his shirt, a dark spot that would become his favorite evidence. She assaulted me, he said smoothly. She performed an invasive procedure without authorization. She compromised patient safety. She endangered a high-value military asset. If I had not intervened, Commander Riker would be dead. Ava lifted her eyes. The room felt colder, not from temperature, but from the way a lie can steal air. Ava's voice stayed calm. The commander is stable, Wexler shrugged. Because my team cleaned up her mess. Diane finally spoke, quiet but strained. Ava, even if your intention was to help, protocol exists for a reason. Scope of practice exists for a reason. Ava's gaze moved to Diane. He had a tension pneumothorax. His oxygen was falling. His blood pressure was narrowing. Dr. Wexler was focused on a neck wound while the patient suffocated. If I had waited for permission, we would have been coding him. Halden's face tightened. Ms. Cole, this institution functions on hierarchy. You do not override the chief resident during an active trauma without clearance. Ava's eyes did not drop. I override death. Wexler's smile widened, cruel. There it is, the cowboy attitude, the action hero fantasies. She even said neutralize the threat in the bay. Halden blinked. You said that? Ava did not deny it. He was the threat to the patient in that moment. Diane winced as if the words hurt her. Ava, she said you cannot talk about physicians that way. Ava's tone softened slightly, but only slightly. Then physicians should stop acting that way. Halden shut the folder with a decisive motion that sounded like a verdict. We have a legal obligation to maintain protocol, he said. We have contracts, liability, public trust. You cannot simply stab a patient because you believe you are right. Ava leaned forward a fraction. It was a needle decompression. It saved his life. Wexler's eyes glittered. You got lucky, he said. Blind luck. If you had punctured his heart, we would be bankrupt. Ava stared at him. You missed a tension pneumothorax in a man you were about to intubate. Wexler's face flushed. I did not miss anything. It was swelling. It was a complex presentation. Ava's voice stayed flat. The trachea was deviated. Halden raised a hand, cutting off the exchange. Enough. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Ava. Termination notice. Effective immediately. Halden's voice was clinical, now practiced as if he had done this too many times to feel anything about it. Ms. Cole, your employment is terminated for cause. We will be reporting this incident to the state board. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. The words landed with bureaucratic finality. The kind of force that can ruin a life without ever raising its voice. Wexler sat back, victory settling into him like warmth. Ava looked at the paper. She did not reach for it. She did not plead. She did not bargain. For a moment, the room waited for her to break. Ava's mind went somewhere else entirely. A different room, a different table, a different kind of consequence. She remembered sitting under dim lights with maps spread out, listening to radio chatter while someone bled in the next tent. She remembered decisions made under pressure that could never be appealed. This was not that. This was smaller, but it was still sharp. Ava stood up slowly. Her knee popped loud enough to make Halden flinch. Ava steadied herself with one hand on the chair. Halden watched her as if expecting an outburst. Ava's voice was quiet. I have one question. Wexler checked his watch with theatrical impatience. Make it quick. Ava turned her head toward him. The tremor in her hands was visible again now, a fragile thing that had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with what her body had paid long ago. "When you go to the ICU," Ava said, "when you look Commander Riker in the eye, are you going to tell him you saved him?" Wexler's throat tightened. His eyes flicked to Halden, then back. "You are fired," he said sharply. "You do not get to question me." Ava nodded once. "That is an answer." She walked to the door without looking at anyone else. Diane's gaze followed her guilt and fear tangled together. Halden stared at the contract in his head. Wexler stared at the bruise that would bloom on his chest and make him feel like the victim. Two security guards met Ava in the hallway. They did not look pleased to be used as tools, but they did not refuse either. They simply moved into position on either side of her, close enough to guide, not close enough to restrain. Ava did not resist. They walked her through the administrative corridor, past framed awards and donor names, past a glass wall where the city skyline looked gray under rain. Everything felt too clean. At the locker room, one guard stood by the door, while the other watched her with the detached patience of a man counting minutes. Ava opened her locker. Inside were simple things: a worn jacket, a small notebook, a knee brace, a stethoscope that had been purchased out of pocket because she did not trust hospital-issue equipment. She placed the items into a cardboard box handed to her by the guard, the standard issue box that made every firing feel identical. On her way out, she passed the break room. Someone had left a mug on the counter with cheap lettering that read, "World's Okayest Nurse," a joke gift from a staff party she had not attended. It had been shoved into her locker on her second week by someone who thought mockery counted as welcome. Ava stared at it for a second, then placed it on top of her belongings anyway. Not because it mattered, because she refused to leave anything that belonged to her in a place that had tried to erase her. The guards escorted her through the employee entrance. The door opened and the cold hit her face sharp and immediate. Rain fell in a steady sheet, turning the parking lot into a mirror. Ava stepped into it with the box cradled against her chest. The cardboard soaked quickly, edges softening. Her scrubs clung to her arms where blood had dried. The hospital behind her glowed warm and bright, a fortress of glass pretending it was untouchable. She walked toward the sidewalk with her measured pace, limp visible now that adrenaline was gone. Cars hissed by on wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and faded. She stopped at the corner where the streetlight flickered. The rain ran down her face and mixed with something warmer that she did not bother wiping away. For a long moment, she simply stood there breathing, listening to the city like it was a foreign language. Then she adjusted her grip on the box and started walking toward the nearest bus stop, shoulders squared against the weather moving forward because stopping would mean feeling everything at once. Rain ran off the brim of Ava Cole's hood in thin, cold streams dripping onto the cardboard box she held against her chest. The streetlight above the bus stop flickered like it could not decide whether to stay loyal to the night. Cars hissed past on wet asphalt, their headlights smearing into long, pale streaks across the puddles. Ava stood with her shoulders squared and her feet planted the way she used to stand on ramps and loading bays, waiting for a door to open on a world that did not care if you were ready. The tremor in her right hand returned now that there was nothing urgent to do. It was faint, rhythmic, almost polite. It did not feel polite. It felt like a reminder. She stared at the hospital in the distance, a bright glass fortress against the low clouds. From here, Summit Ridge looked clean and calm, as if inside it no one had ever suffocated on a table while a man with perfect hair argued with anatomy. Ava lowered her gaze to the box. The top was softening from rain. Her mug sat at an angle, the cheap lettering already starting to blur. A stethoscope lay coiled like a tired snake. A little plant shivered as the wind pushed water through the cardboard. She swallowed once hard and turned her face toward the road. A city bus groaned into view, brakes squealing, doors sighing open. The driver glanced at her soaked scrubs and the box and gave a tired nod as if he had seen every kind of bad day rolling through his doors. Ava climbed aboard, dropped bills into the slot, and walked down the aisle without looking at the other passengers. She took the last seat in the back corner, wedged the box in her lap, and pressed her forearm across it like it was something fragile and dangerous. The bus pulled away, wipers beating time against the windshield. The city slid by in gray streaks. Ava watched the world blur and tried to keep her breathing steady. In her head, Halden's voice replayed with crisp finality. Terminated for cause. Reported to the board. The words did not sting the way they should have. Not because they were not sharp, but because she had learned to survive worse than sharp words in clean rooms. Still, a different kind of fear crept in now, quiet and practical. Licensure meant work. Work meant pension. Pension meant she could keep her life small and contained. Without it, everything widened. She imagined Wexler filling out paperwork describing her as unstable, aggressive, reckless. She imagined a state investigator reading it and seeing the tremor and the age and the plain clothes and deciding the story made sense. Ava leaned her head against the rain-cold window. Her breath fogged the glass. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of exhaustion, the kind that came from long shifts, but the kind that came from having to be invisible every day just to keep the past from crawling out of its grave. A little boy across the aisle stared at her blood-stained sleeve. His mother pulled him closer and whispered something without looking at Ava. Ava did not blame her. Blood made people look away. The bus rattled over a pothole. The plant in the box trembled. Ava adjusted it with careful fingers the way she adjusted everything, as if neatness could keep the world from tipping. Across town behind glass and security doors, Commander Nathan Riker floated toward waking. The Recovery Intensive Care Unit at Summit Ridge was quiet in the way only machines could make it quiet. Vents whispered. Monitors chirped. IV pumps clicked with patient insistence. The lighting was softer than the trauma bays dimmed like a promise of rest, but the air still smelled like antiseptic and warmed plastic. Riker lay propped up in bed, chest wrapped in thick bandages, a drain line trailing out from his ribs. His mouth was dry. His throat burned. Each inhale felt like pulling air through a narrow tube. Pain sat in his body like a heavy stone. His eyes opened slowly. For a moment, he did not know where he was. He saw ceiling tiles, a hanging monitor, the edge of a curtain. He tried to lift his hand and found it tethered by IV tubing. Memory came in flashes, disconnected, but vivid. Rain, rotor wash, the sting of something hot tearing into his chest, the sensation of drowning in his own body, the bright light of a trauma bay. A woman's voice, low and steady, telling him to breathe, and then her face. Older lined calm, hair pulled back tight, eyes like they had seen too much and stayed anyway. He heard himself whisper a word, more breath than sound. Nurse. A figure stirred at his bedside. Paige Larkin rose from a chair, blinking like she had been dozing. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair was pulled back in a rushed knot. She smiled too quickly. "Commander Riker, you're awake," she said, voice bright with relief and performance. "Thank God. You've been under for a while." Riker's gaze moved over her and away. "Where is she?" he rasped. Paige's smile faltered. "Who, sir?" "The woman," he said. Gray hair. "The one who put the needle in." Paige swallowed. Her eyes flicked toward the door toward the hallway where authority lived. "Oh," she said as if the question was inconvenient. "You mean Ava?" The older nurse. Riker tested the name, turning it over like a coin. "Ava." Paige nodded too hard. "Yes, sir." "Get her," Riker said. Paige shifted in place. She looked suddenly uncertain. "I can call her unit." "She saved my life," Riker said, voice roughening with anger. "Get her." Paige leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip. "She isn't here anymore, Commander." Riker's eyes narrowed. The pain medication made him float, but something in his chest anchored him hard. "Why?" Paige hesitated, then chose the story she thought would protect her. "There was an incident," she whispered. "She wasn't supposed to do what she did. Dr. Wexler fired her. She broke protocol." Riker tried to sit up. A wave of pain slammed into his ribs. The monitors chirped louder. Paige's hands rose, panicked. "Commander, please, you need to lay back." Riker ignored her, jaw clenched. "Protocol," he rasped. "That protocol was killing me." Page's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm just telling you what happened." Riker's voice dropped deadly calm despite the weakness. "Who escorted her out?" Page's mouth opened and closed. "Security. Administration. I don't know. Dr. Wexler said she assaulted him." Riker's hand curled against the sheet. The memory of Wexler's face flashed in his mind, the way the man had stared at his neck while his chest squeezed tighter, the way the room had felt like it was shrinking until the hiss released him. He swallowed hard, throat-burning. "Get Wexler," he said. Page nodded quickly, relief in her movement. This she understood. Doctors. Hierarchy. The safe world. She hurried out into the corridor. She did not make it far. The double doors at the end of the unit swung open and the hallway seemed to lose air. 2 military police stepped in first, scanning corners with practiced intensity. Their uniforms were wet from rain. Their posture was hard and controlled. They did not belong to the hospital. The hospital belonged to them now. Behind them came a colonel carrying a black briefcase. And then came the man who made even the staff stop breathing. General Silas Braddock entered the ICU like a force of nature, in dress uniform, 4 silver stars catching the overhead lights. He carried a cane in his right hand. He did not lean on it so much as use it to measure the world's patience. His face was lined, scarred in places, eyes sharp and pale. His presence made the air feel heavier, like pressure before a storm. Page froze in the hallway. Riker's eyes widened slightly. He tried to push himself up again, reflexive, even with pain. Braddock lifted a hand, palm down. "Stay put." Riker's mouth twitched into the hint of a grin. "Sir." Braddock stopped at the bedside. His voice was gruff, warm only at the edges. "You look like hell, Nate." Riker exhaled carefully. "Feel like it." Braddock glanced at the monitors, at the bandages, at the drain line. He nodded once, then turned his head toward the corridor. Wexler arrived at a jog, tie adjusted, hair perfect again. Expression bright with calculation. He had the look of a man who believed he could charm steel. General Braddock Wexler said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "Dr. Cameron Wexler, Chief Resident." "It's an honor. I'm pleased to report Commander Riker is stable." Braddock did not take the hand. He did not even glance at it. He walked past Wexler as if the doctor were a piece of equipment left in the wrong place. Wexler's hand hung in the air for a beat, then lowered slowly. Braddock looked down at Riker. "Report says you came in with a tension pneumothorax." Riker's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." Braddock turned his gaze back toward Wexler. The warmth vanished. Who decompressed him? Wexler drew himself up, ready. "It was a team effort, General. I directed the stabilization." Riker's eyes hardened. No. The word was weak but sharp. Braddock's head turned back to Riker. Riker pushed out the sentence with effort. "He fired her." Wexler's posture stiffened. "Commander, with respect, you're disoriented. There was interference in the bay. A staff member acted outside her scope. For safety and protocol, I took appropriate action." Braddock's eyes narrowed. Her. Riker's gaze fixed on Braddock. "Ava Cole. She put the needle in. She moved like one of us." Wexler was staring at my neck while my lungs collapsed. Wexler's face flushed. "That is an exaggeration." Riker's voice dropped gravel and rage. "I was drowning. Then I wasn't. Because of her." Braddock's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. The general turned slightly, and the colonel with the briefcase stepped forward as if he had been waiting for that cue his whole life. The colonel opened the case and pulled out a thick, black folder. It was not a hospital file. It looked like the kind of folder that lived in locked drawers behind doors, that required badges and codes and men with guns. Wexler blinked, confusion creeping into his eyes. "What is that?" Braddock did not answer the question. He opened the folder and began reading, voice dangerously calm. "Ava Cole," he said. "Civilian alias of Lieutenant Colonel Ava Marlowe. Cole, retired. Army Medical Corps. Special Operations Trauma Lead. Multiple deployments." Page, standing near the doorway, made a small, involuntary sound. A nurse across the hall stopped mid-step with a chart in her hands. Wexler's mouth opened. No sound came out. Braddock continued, eyes scanning lines that looked like they had been typed by a machine that did not care about feelings. She served as senior trauma medic attached to Ranger Elements and Joint Task Units. field commendations, classified evaluations. Braddock's gaze lifted to Wexler. She is not a transfer from a rural clinic. Wexler's voice came out thin. I did not know. Braddock's tone stayed even. You did not listen. Wexler recovered enough to grab the only defense he had left. General, even if her background is true, she assaulted an attending and performed an invasive procedure without authorization. High-value patient. Liability. This hospital cannot allow that. Braddock's eyes flicked back to the folder. Her hands shake. He read softly, and the words in his mouth sounded like an accusation. Nerve damage sustained during an engagement where she maintained manual pressure on a wounded soldier's femoral artery for 6 hours after an explosive strike. Refused evacuation until personnel were extracted. Wexler's face went pale. Braddock took a step closer, and suddenly the doctor looked smaller, younger, and less certain. You fired her for incompetence, Braddock said. Wexler swallowed. She was stalking carts. She looked. She looked like she did not belong. Riker's voice rasped from the bed. She just wanted peace. Braddock's eyes held on Wexler. And you treated her like trash. Wexler's shoulders rose with a desperate breath. General, my duty is to protect patients and protect this institution. Braddock's cane tapped the floor once, a quiet sound that silenced the hallway. Your duty is to keep people alive. He turned to the colonel. Where is she? The colonel touched an earpiece. He listened, nodding. Perimeter security saw a woman matching her description leave on foot 10 minutes ago. She is likely on public transit. Braddock's jaw tightened. Find her, now. The colonel's voice turned sharp as he spoke into the mic. Locate and intercept. Minimal disruption. Do not spook civilians. Confirm identity before contact. Wexler stepped forward, panic rising. General, this is unnecessary. She will be processed through proper channels. Braddock looked at him with a cold, flat stare. Doctor, I suggest you start thinking about your own channels. Wexler's voice cracked. She assaulted me. Braddock's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. If Lieutenant Colonel Cole wanted to hurt you, you would not be standing here arguing. Riker's eyes closed for a moment as pain washed over him, then opened again, burning. Bring her back, Riker whispered. Braddock nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of orders. He turned and the hallway moved with him, like gravity had changed direction. Wexler stood frozen near the nurse's station, face drained, watching the military presence sweep past. Paige stared at the floor, her earlier confidence gone. Jonah Vance appeared at the edge of the unit, eyes wide, absorbing the reality that the quiet nurse he had half defended had been a legend all along. Inside Riker's room, the monitors continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to reputations and contracts. Outside, Ava's bus rattled through the rain. The number on the front display flickered as the bus turned onto a wider avenue. Traffic thickened. Brake lights smeared red across the wet street like paint dragged by a brush. Ava's phone buzzed once in her pocket. Unknown number. She did not take it out. She stared out the window and watched the city slide by, trying to think in practical steps. Find an apartment. Call the board. Get ahead of the report. Find a lawyer. Take a job that did not require a license if the license was taken. Her mind did not want to go there. It wanted to crawl back into the small box she had built for herself. The bus driver's voice crackled over the intercom. Next stop, East Platte. Ava did not recognize the stop. She had not taken this route before. It did not matter. She just needed to get away from the hospital, away from the people who had watched her save a life, and then treated her like a crime scene. The bus rolled forward, then slowed again as traffic tightened. Ava's eyes drifted to the rear window. At first, she thought the flashing lights were just another emergency vehicle on a wet road. Colorado Springs had plenty of them. Then she saw the pattern. 2 dark SUVs moved in coordinated lines, not weaving, not hesitating, controlling space with quiet authority. Their grille lights flashed red and blue, reflecting off puddles and storefronts. Ava's stomach tightened. The bus slowed. The driver leaned forward, squinting. What the hell, he muttered. The SUVs slid sideways across lanes ahead, blocking traffic with aggressive precision. Another vehicle pulled in behind the bus. then another. The bus was boxed in. A passenger near the middle raised his phone. "Yo, is this a raid?" The word raid spread through the bus like a spark. People looked up. Heads turned. Fear prickled the air. The driver's hands lifted slightly off the wheel, uncertain. Ava sank lower in her seat shoulders, hunching instinctively. Her heart began to hammer, not the soft, anxious hammer of civilian fear, but the hard, adrenal thud she had not felt in years. "This is federal," her brain supplied coldly before she could stop it. She clutched the box tighter. The tremor in her hands turned into something sharper. Outside figures moved through rain. They did not move like city police. They moved like trained predators, fluid and controlled heads turning in coordinated sweeps, hands positioned with purpose. Military police. A voice boomed through a megaphone from the front of the bus, amplified and flat. "Remain seated. This vehicle is under federal interdiction." A collective gasp rose from the passengers. The bus fell into a stunned silence, broken only by rain drumming the roof and the distant hiss of traffic now forced to stop. Ava's throat tightened. Her mind flashed to Wexler's face, to his threat to the termination notice. He called charges, she thought. He made this happen. She felt something like anger, but it was buried under the older instinct to assess the situation. 2 MPs boarded the bus. They filled the doorway, broad shoulders, wet uniforms, dark glasses despite the dim light. They did not look at the driver. They scanned the passengers row by row, their gaze moving with methodical speed. One spoke into his radio. "Clear, target in the rear." Ava's pulse thundered. She forced her breathing slow, steady, as if she could calm her body into invisibility. Then she heard the sound that changed everything. A cane tapping metal steps. Clack, clack. The bus went so quiet she could hear the wipers squeaking at the windshield. A man ascended into the aisle. He was not wearing tactical gear. He was wearing dress uniform, immaculate and dry beneath an umbrella held by an aide outside. 4 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders. General Silas Braddock. Some passengers recognized him instantly. Their faces shifted from fear to awe, the way civilians respond to power they have only seen on television. A teenager with the phone lowered it suddenly, unsure whether recording was brave or stupid. Braddock walked down the aisle without looking left or right. His focus was fixed on the back corner. Ava did not stand. She could not make her legs move. The box in her lap felt heavier than it should have, like it was full of stones, instead of cheap belongings. Braddock stopped in front of her and held the silence for a long moment. Ava stared at the mug on top of the box, the blurred letters mocking her. Then Braddock spoke, voice softened in a way that did not match his public persona. "You are hard to track down, Colonel." Ava's breath caught. Her eyes lifted to his face. Rainlight glinted off the edges of his uniform. Up close, his expression carried something older than command, something that looked like recognition and relief and restrained fury. Ava's throat worked. "General." Braddock's gaze dropped to the bloodstains on her sleeve. "They fired you." It was not a question. Ava nodded once. The motion felt small. "Yes." A woman in the seat across the aisle leaned back, eyes wide-mouthed, slightly open, as if she had been dropped into someone else's movie. Braddock's jaw tightened. He looked at Ava's box, then back at her. Ava's voice came out rough. "I broke protocol." Braddock's eyes held hers. "You saved a commander's life." Ava's fingers tightened on the cardboard. "I put my hands on a civilian doctor." Braddock's tone stayed steady. "You stopped him from getting your patient killed." Ava swallowed. Her eyes burned. She kept them open, refusing to let the tears fall in front of strangers. "I just wanted quiet," she said, and the confession felt like surrender. "I did not want this." Braddock reached down and took the box from her lap. Ava's hands rose reflexively. "Sir, you do not need to carry that." Braddock held the box like it mattered, like it contained something more than a mug and a plant. "It is not trash," he said. "It is evidence." He shifted the box under one arm, then extended his free hand toward her. "Come on," he said, and now his voice carried down the bus loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are not going home on public transit." Ava stared at his hand. The last time someone had offered her a hand like that, it had been on a ramp under rotor wash when the ground was shaking and the air smelled like fuel. Her knee ached. Her hands trembled. She took the hand anyway. Braddock's grip was strong, steady, and warm through the chill. Ava rose slowly, and as she stood, her posture changed, without her meaning it to. Shoulders back, chin level, feet planted with a quiet certainty that did not belong to a tired nurse. A few passengers stared as if they were seeing a different person than the one who had boarded soaked and silent minutes earlier. Braddock turned slightly toward the front of the bus. "We are done here," he said. The MP stepped aside. The driver sat frozen hands on the wheel, eyes locked on the general. Braddock guided Ava down the aisle. People pulled their feet and made space, not out of fear now, but respect, mixed with confusion. The teenager with the phone lowered it fully, suddenly aware that some moments did not belong online. When Ava stepped off the bus, rain hit her face like cold needles. Outside, the street was blocked by a small convoy. Soldiers stood at attention near the SUVs, rain bouncing off their caps. An aide held an umbrella over Braddock, then adjusted it so it covered Ava too, an instinctive act of care that made her chest tighten. A colonel in the lead vehicle snapped to a rigid posture. His voice cut through the rain. Present arms. Rifles came up in perfect unison, hands rose to brows. They were not saluting the general. They were saluting her. Ava stopped dead. The breath left her lungs. For a moment, she could not move. She did not know where to put her eyes. Braddock looked at her expression softening at the edges. "They heard," he said quietly. Ava's throat worked. Her voice was barely audible. "I do not deserve that." Braddock's tone hardened. "You earned it." Ava lifted her hand slowly, then more firmly returning the salute with the precision her body remembered. Her fingers trembled, but the line was straight. The gesture was clean. The soldiers lowered their hands together. Braddock opened the door of the lead SUV. Warm air poured out, carrying the smell of leather and clean fabric. "Get in," he said. Ava hesitated a fraction, then climbed inside. The seat cradled her like something too soft for a world that usually demanded hard edges. Her wet scrubs stuck to the upholstery. She did not care. Braddock sat beside her, cane resting against his knee. An aide closed the door, sealing them away from the rain and the stairs. For a moment, the only sound inside the vehicle was the low hum of the engine and Ava's breathing as she tried to get her body to stop vibrating with adrenaline. Braddock looked at the box on his lap. The mug sat sideways, letters smeared. He adjusted it carefully, then set the box at his feet. Ava watched him. "How did you find me?" Braddock's eyes stayed forward. "You forget what kind of resources the military has when one of its own gets stepped on." Ava's jaw tightened. "Wexler is going to ruin my license." Braddock's gaze shifted to her for the first time since the bus. "He will be busy." Ava swallowed. "I did not want to be seen." Braddock's voice dropped. "Nate saw you." Ava looked down at her hands. The tremor was still there. She hated it most when there was nothing else to do, nothing else to focus on. Braddock's tone softened again, just slightly. "You disappeared for a reason." Ava did not answer. Outside, the convoy began to move. Tires hissed through water. The SUV slid back into traffic like sharks through a current, lights still flashing, clearing lanes with silent authority. Ava watched the city through the tinted window. Buildings passed in gray sheets. Street signs blurred. A familiar kind of motion settled into her bones, the feeling of being carried toward something she could not control, only face. Braddock spoke again, voice calm, conversational, as if they were not surrounded by armed vehicles. "When you left, he said you did not tell anyone." Ava's eyes stayed on the window. "I did not owe anyone an explanation." Braddock's cane tapped once against the floorboard, a quiet sound. "You owed yourself one." Ava's mouth tightened. "I was tired." Braddock nodded, as if that explained more than 100 pages of reports ever could. Silence returned. Not empty, but heavy with things neither of them said. Ava's mind flickered with images she usually kept locked away. A tent lit by a single bulb. A man screaming for morphine. Blood on her forearms. The smell of burned metal. Voices calling her name in a different tone, a different world. She pressed her fingertips together, feeling the tremor, then letting it go. Braddock leaned back slightly. "Nate asked for you." Ava's chest tightened. He does not even know me. Braddock's eyes narrowed. He knows what it feels like to die. He knows who pulled him back. Ava closed her eyes for a second, letting the warmth of the SUV settle into her wet clothes. When she opened them, the skyline ahead shifted, and through the rain haze, she saw the bright glass shape of a large medical complex rising from the gray lights burning steady against the storm. The convoy's lights reflected across its facade in pulsing blues and reds, painting the building like a warning. Ava's breath caught, not from fear exactly, but from the sense of stepping back into a place that had tried to throw her away. Braddock's hand moved to the cane, gripping it with quiet purpose. The SUVs slowed as they approached the campus entrance tires, whispering over wet pavement sirens, silent now, but presence loud enough to make the guard booth snap to attention. The automatic gate lifted without hesitation. The gate lifted without hesitation, and the convoy rolled onto campus as if the hospital belonged to the chain of command. Rain washed over the windshields in sheets. The lead SUV turned past the emergency entrance, past the line of ambulances idling under the awning, past the bright red letters of the trauma center sign. People under the canopy stopped mid-step. A security guard raised a hand to his radio, then lowered it again when he saw the uniformed riders flanking the vehicles. Doors opened before the engines even died. Soldiers in dress uniforms spilled out and formed a corridor with the kind of precision that made civilians step back without understanding why. Inside the SUV, Ava sat very still. Warmth clung to her skin now, but the tremor in her fingers had not fully faded. She watched the hospital through rain-streaked glass. In the lobby beyond those doors, there were people who had laughed at her hands and her pace and her hair. There were people who had watched her save a life, then walked her out like a hazard. General Braddock leaned toward the door and gripped his cane. "You do not have to say anything," he told her, voice low. Ava looked at him. "I am not afraid to speak." Braddock nodded once, as if that was the only answer he expected. The door opened. Rain air rushed in. An aide raised an umbrella over Braddock and shifted it so it covered Ava as well. Ava stepped out onto wet pavement boots, finding traction, knee aching with each movement. She kept her shoulders back. She kept her gaze steady. The automatic doors slid open and the lobby swallowed the sound of rain. Summit Ridge's main lobby was built to impress. Glass walls soared toward a ceiling of steel beams. A polished stone floor reflected everything like water. A donor wall ran the length of one side, names etched into brushed metal beneath soft lighting. The air smelled like expensive cleaning solution and fresh coffee from a kiosk near the entrance. Today, the lobby felt like a place waiting for a verdict. Mark Halden paced near reception shirt collar, damp with sweat despite the cool air. He checked his watch, then checked it again, then looked toward the doors as if staring could summon what he wanted. His eyes landed on Dr. Cameron Wexler, standing a few feet away, leaning against a marble pillar with rehearsed calm. Wexler looked composed at first glance. His suit was sharp. His hair was perfect. His hands were folded the way a man folds them when he has convinced himself he is untouchable. But his foot tapped once every few seconds, an unconscious betrayal. Halden leaned in, voice tight. The general said 1 o'clock. It is 1:03. Wexler smiled too bright. It is a power move. He is reminding us who writes the checks. Halden's eyes darted to the nurses watching from the mezzanine, and the hallway edges drawn by the rumor of uniforms and flashing lights. Just keep your story straight. Wexler's smile hardened. My story is straight. I stabilized the commander. The nurse interfered. Administration handled it. That is the narrative. Halden swallowed. Your father will cover us if this goes sideways. Wexler's jaw tightened. He always does. The lobby's murmurs died the moment the first pair of soldiers stepped through the doors. Then General Braddock entered. He did not hurry. He did not look around. He walked forward with his cane in one hand, umbrella left behind, at the threshold. Rain droplets still clinging to the edges of his uniform. The air seemed to shift around him as if the building itself understood rank. And at his side walked Ava, not in blood-stained, oversized scrubs, not hunched, not trying to vanish. She wore clean, dark fatigues and a weathered field jacket that looked older than some of the residents watching from above. The fabric was faded in places as if it had been baked by sun and sand. On her collar, the metal of her rank caught the lobby light. She walked in step with Braddock not behind him. Halden's face brightened with forced relief. He stepped forward with both hands slightly extended, palms open. "General Braddock, welcome. Mark Halden, Administrator. We are honored. We take this matter very seriously and we are prepared to cooperate fully." Braddock walked past him without acknowledging the greeting. Halden's hands lowered slowly. Wexler stepped off the marble pillar and straightened, confidence rising again as he put on his professional mask. "General Wexler," said, voice warm and practiced. "Dr. Cameron Wexler, Chief Resident. I appreciate you coming. Commander Riker is stable. We managed the injuries and he is under excellent care." Braddock stopped in front of him at a distance that felt intimate and threatening at the same time. "Dr. Wexler," Braddock said, voice low. Wexler smiled. "Yes, sir." Braddock looked at him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted, not to Ava, not to the donor wall, but to the balcony where staff had gathered. Nurses in scrubs, residents with lanyards, security with folded arms. Paige Larkin pressed against the rail, eyes wide, face pale. Braddock reached into his jacket and produced a tablet. "I have spent the last hour reviewing telemetry data and video feeds," he said. The words carried, amplified by the lobby's height and the sudden hush. Wexler's smile twitched. "General, with respect, that is not necessary. The situation was managed." Braddock did not respond to the protest. He tapped the screen and turned the tablet outward. The image froze on a trauma bay moment. Wexler at the head of the bed, face angled toward the commander's neck wound. Ava at the right side, hand placed on Riker's chest, catheter poised with calm precision. The commander's oxygen number glowed on the monitor behind them, low and falling. The lobby went silent enough that you could hear the hum of the reception desk computer. Braddock's voice cut through the stillness. "Commander Riker entered this facility with a tension pneumothorax," he said. His airway was deviated. His right lung was failing to ventilate. His neck veins were distended. His blood pressure was collapsing. Wexler cleared his throat. "General, clinical interpretation in trauma is complex. A bleed in the neck can present similarly." Braddock turned the tablet, slightly enlarging the frame. The tracheal shift was visible. The right side of the chest barely rose. A first-year combat medic in a ditch would have recognized that within seconds, Braddock said. "You missed it for minutes." Wexler's face flushed red. "That is not accurate." Braddock stepped closer. The general's presence made Wexler look young. "It is accurate," Braddock said. "And when this woman attempted to save the commander's life, you ordered her removed. You belittled her. You fired her." Halden's head snapped toward Wexler, panic sharpening his features. "Doctor, what did you do?" Wexler's voice rose defensive. "She assaulted me. She performed an unauthorized invasive procedure. She compromised protocol. She endangered the patient." Braddock's eyes stayed on Wexler like a sightline. "You fired the person who decompressed the commander," Braddock said. Wexler's jaw worked. "She was a nurse. She was not authorized." A sound came from the balcony. Jonah Vance stepped forward, hands gripping the rail. "It worked." Jonah blurted, then seemed to regret speaking. His voice steadied. "The decompression worked. The saturation climbed immediately. We all saw it." Wexler whipped his head toward Jonah. Vance shut up. Braddock's gaze flicked up toward Jonah and then returned to Wexler. "You tell your staff to shut up," Braddock said quietly. "That is a habit that kills people." Ava's voice entered the lobby for the first time. "Dr. Wexler," she said, calm and even. Wexler turned toward her like a man turning toward a fire he had started and thought he could control. His eyes narrowed. "Ava," he said the name sharp with contempt. "This is beyond you now." Ava stepped forward one pace. The movement was small, but it drew focus. "You called me a janitor," she said. Wexler's lips parted as if he might deny it, but the lobby's faces were too still, too attentive. "You made a bet," Ava continued. $500. You said I would not last a week. You said my hands meant I did not belong in your trauma bay." Wexler's voice came out strained. Emotions were high. It was a stressful environment. Ava's eyes did not change. "The environment did not make you cruel. You brought that with you." Halden tried to step in again, voice pleading. "General, please." This hospital had no knowledge of Ms. Cole's background. "We were misled. We take full responsibility and we are prepared to make this right." Braddock looked at Halden as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Do you," Braddock asked, "or do you take the responsibility that keeps your contracts intact?" Halden swallowed. "General Summit Ridge provides critical services. We value our relationship with the Department of Defense." Braddock's cane tapped once against the floor. The sound was quiet and final. "Then you should value competence," Braddock said. Halden turned on Wexler with the speed of a man saving himself. "Dr. Wexler's employment is terminated, effective immediately," Halden announced, voice shaking. "We will report the matter to the State Board for negligence." Wexler stared at him. For the first time, the mask cracked. "You cannot do that." Halden's face tightened. "I can." Wexler's voice rose into a near shout. "My father is Senator Wexler. My family funds this wing." Braddock's expression stayed flat. "Your father is on the phone with the Secretary of Defense," Braddock said, explaining why his son nearly killed a Navy SEAL commander. Wexler's face went pale, then red again, then pale. "That is not possible," he said. But the certainty was gone. Two security guards stepped forward from the edge of the lobby. They were the same men who had escorted Ava out hours earlier. Their expressions were stiff with discomfort, as if they understood they were being asked to correct the wrong person this time. Halden nodded to them. The guards moved in. Wexler jerked backward. "No, no, this is insane." They gripped his arms. Wexler tried to twist free, voice breaking into frantic anger. "Get your hands off me," he shouted. "This is my hospital." Ava watched him without triumph. Wexler's eyes landed on her. "You did this," he spat. Ava's voice was quiet. "You did this." They dragged him toward the revolving doors. His shoes slipped once on the polished floor. The lobby stayed silent, like the building itself refused to give him an audience. As the doors spun, rain air rushed in. Wexler's shout was swallowed by weather and glass and motion. The doors released him into the gray outside. The lobby exhaled. It was not relief exactly. It was the release of tension that had been held too long. Halden turned back toward Braddock with a desperate smile that did not belong on his face. "General," he said, "we are committed to correcting this." "Ms. Cole, Lieutenant Colonel Cole, we would be honored to have you back. Name your position." Diane Kessler stepped forward, now face drawn with guilt. "Ava," she said, voice soft. "I am sorry." Ava looked at Diane. She did not offer comfort. She did not offer accusation. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the words without letting them rewrite the hours that came before. Halden continued, voice rushing. "Chief of Nursing, Director of Patient Care, we can restructure the entire unit around your expertise. Compensation is not an issue." Ava's gaze moved over the lobby. She saw Paige standing rigid near the balcony rail, hands clasped tight, eyes wet. She saw Jonah with his jaw clenched, staring at the floor like he was replaying every moment he had stayed quiet. She saw nurses who had been trained to swallow their voices because someone above them might get offended. Ava's voice carried evenly across the polished space. "I do not want a title," she said. Halden blinked. "Of course. We can discuss any package you want." "I want the residency program," Ava said. "I want trauma training." Halden stared confused. "You want to teach?" "I want to change how they operate," Ava replied. "I want protocols that reward listening. I want training that forces them to recognize failure before it becomes a fatality." Braddock watched her with something close to approval. Diane's expression shifted as if she felt the weight of what Ava was asking. That would be a significant change. Ava looked at Diane. "Significant is the point." Halden nodded too quickly. "Done. Whatever you need." Ava did not smile. "I need your support when they push back." Halden swallowed. "You have it." Ava's eyes stayed on him until he looked away first. Braddock's cane tapped lightly. "Good." The elevator chime sounded in the lobby, bright and ordinary. Ding. Heads turned. The elevator doors opened and a nurse pushed a wheelchair into view. The man in it was pale beneath the lobby light's chest, wrapped thick under a hospital gown. A nasal cannula traced across his face, An IV pole rolled beside him like a companion. Commander Nathan Riker sat upright with the stubbornness of someone who had spent his life refusing to obey pain. The nurse leaned close, whispering urgently, "Commander, you cannot be down here." Riker raised a hand. "Stop." His voice was weak, but it carried. He braced his fingers on the wheelchair arm. "Help me up," he said. The nurse hesitated, panic in her eyes, then placed a hand under his arm. Another staff member rushed forward, ready to catch him if he fell. Riker stood. His legs trembled. Sweat beaded at his hairline. His mouth tightened as pain rippled through his ribs. But he stood. He looked across the lobby and found Ava. Ava's composure held for a moment, then cracked at the edges. Her throat tightened. Her eyes brightened. She took one step forward instinctively and then stopped as if afraid to disturb the gravity of the moment. "Commander," she said, voice low. Riker's lips twitched into a faint expression that might have been a smile if he had more breath. "Colonel," he rasped. Ava's jaw clenched. "Sit down." Riker shook his head slightly. "Not yet." He turned his gaze outward, addressing the people who had gathered. "They told me the janitor saved me," he said, voice rough. "They told me she was fired." Halden flinched. Diane looked down. Riker swallowed hard, drew in a careful breath, and continued. "I have been shot. I have been blown up. I have watched men drown on dry ground because someone hesitated," he said. "I know what a hero looks like." His eyes moved briefly toward the revolving doors where Wexler had been thrown into rain, then back to Ava. "And it does not look like a suit," he finished. Ava's hands curled at her sides. The tremor fluttered in her fingers, betraying emotion more than nerves. Riker lifted his right hand slowly. The movement was deliberate, painful, reverent. He brought his fingers to his brow. A formal salute, held long enough that the entire lobby had to sit inside it. Ava stared at him, breath caught. Her vision blurred for a moment. She blinked it clear. Then she snapped her heels together, despite the ache in her knee, and returned the salute with crisp precision. The nurse beside Riker let out a small sound, half fear, half awe. People on the balcony straightened. Someone near the reception desk began to clap, hesitant at first, then stronger. Another set of hands joined, then another. The sound grew into a wave that filled the lobby loud enough to drown out the hum of the building. Ava lowered her hand slowly and stepped toward Riker. "You stubborn bastard," she said quietly, voice thick. Riker's mouth quirked, still breathing. Ava reached the wheelchair and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It was not a medical touch. It was something older, something that understood survival. "Sit," she ordered. Riker allowed the nurse to guide him back down. The moment his weight hit the chair, he exhaled like he had been holding his breath for hours. Braddock watched the scene with his chin lifted, cane-planted eyes steady. Halden moved closer again, careful now, as if he had learned that this was not a room where he could control the narrative. Commander Halden began. Riker lifted a hand. "Save it." Halden's mouth shut. Ava turned away from the lobby's eyes and toward Diane Kessler. "Get me a room," Ava said. "A classroom. A sim lab if you have one." Diane nodded quickly. "We do." Ava's gaze moved to Jonah Vance. "Dr. Vance," she said. Jonah flinched, then stepped forward, face tight. "Yes." "You spoke up," Ava said. "Late, but you spoke." Jonah swallowed. "I should have listened sooner." Ava did not comment on what he should have done. "You will be in the first session," she said. "Front row." Jonah nodded. "Yes." Ava's eyes found Paige on the balcony. Paige's face was wet now, whether from tears or humidity, it did not matter. Her posture was small. Paige started down the stairs hesitant, like she expected to be struck. She stopped a few feet away, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. "I am sorry," Paige whispered. Ava looked at her for a long moment. The lobby's applause had faded into murmurs, but the weight of attention remained. Ava's voice stayed calm. "Do you know why I checked dates twice?" Paige shook her head. Ava nodded toward Riker's bandaged chest. "Because people die from small mistakes," she said. "And people die when the room laughs at the wrong person." Paige's lips trembled. "I did not think." Ava's gaze did not soften, but it did not harden either. "Start," she said. Paige nodded once fast, as if clinging to the command. Braddock shifted his cane and looked at Halden. "You will send the commander's medical record and the footage to the proper channels," he said. You will cooperate with any investigation. Haldon nodded. Yes, General. Braddock's eyes narrowed slightly. You will also fix your staffing. Haldon's nod faltered. We will review. Braddock's cane tapped once. You will fix it. Haldon swallowed. Yes, General. Riker's nurse hovered near the wheelchair, still shaken. Ava reached toward her and placed 2 fingers lightly on the nurse's forearm. You did good, Ava said. The nurse blinked, surprised. I just pushed him. Ava's mouth curved faintly. That is sometimes the job. The nurse's shoulders eased a fraction. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people returning to work with their heads full of the kind of moment that changes the way you breathe in a building. Nurses drifted back toward units. Residents slipped away, with eyes lowered, a little less sure of their own invincibility. Ava stayed with Riker until he was safely back in the elevator, then watched the doors close. When the elevator disappeared upward, Ava finally allowed herself to exhale. Braddock stood beside her. You will be all right here, he said. Ava stared at the donor wall. Names etched in metal. Power carved into permanence. I am not here to be all right, she replied. Braddock's eyes held hers for a moment. Then he nodded once, a quiet sign of respect. He turned and walked away, cane tapping rhythmically across the polished floor, soldiers falling into step behind him. Diane approached Ava again, a folder already in her hands. We can reinstate you today. We can fix your record. Ava looked at the folder, then at Diane. You can start by calling off the board report, she said. Diane nodded. It will be done. Ava's gaze did not leave her. And no one touches my file except you. Diane's eyes widened, of course. Ava took the folder anyway, not opening it yet, simply feeling its weight in her hands. Bring me the trauma schedules, she said. Every resident rotation, every attending coverage, every training requirement. Diane nodded quickly. I will have it. Ava turned toward the hall that led back to the trauma bays. The farther she walked from the lobby, the more the hospital returned to itself. The smell sharpened, the lighting hardened, the sound of monitors grew louder, the floor became tile again. People moved fast again, but now some of them glanced at her differently, as if they had seen a different shape beneath the scrubs. In Trauma Bay 1, someone was already cleaning up. Blood wiped away. Instruments restocked. The room reset itself like a stage between shows. Ava stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. Her hands trembled faintly, then steadied as she focused on the details. The catheter tray, the chest tube kit, the suction line, the airway drawer. This was her language. This was where she made sense. Jonah approached from behind, careful, like he did not want to startle her. Ava, he said. Ava did not turn right away. Doctor, she replied. Jonah swallowed. Colonel. Ava finally looked at him. Jonah's voice was quiet. I froze in there. When he told you to leave? I watched him ignore you. I knew it was wrong. Ava's eyes held steady. You still followed him. Jonah nodded once, shame tightening his face. Yes. Ava did not raise her voice. She did not punish him with words. She simply stared at him until he could not hold the gaze anymore. Then she spoke. In my program, you will speak when you see danger, she said. You will be wrong sometimes. You will be right sometimes. You will speak anyway. Jonah nodded, throat working, yes. Ava turned back to the bay. Go wash the floor, she said. Jonah blinked. What? Ava looked at him. Go clean the blood, she repeated. You will learn what it smells like when you miss something. And you will learn to respect the people who clean up after your mistakes. Jonah's face flushed. Then he nodded, yes. He walked to the supply closet and returned with mop and disinfectant without a word. Ava watched him work. The smell of bleach rose into the air, harsh and clean. On the far side of the unit, Paige moved through a patient check with a new stiffness. She double-checked a medication label. She paused before speaking to a resident, then spoke anyway. Doctor, his pressure is trending down, she said. The resident looked annoyed, then looked at the monitor, then nodded. Good catch. Paige's face changed the smallest shift, like someone learning a new posture. Days later, the first training session began in a small simulation room on the second floor. The room smelled like rubber and plastic. A mannequin lay on a gurney chest, rising mechanically. Monitors displayed numbers designed to imitate panic. Residents filled the chairs, some with arms crossed, some with nervous energy, some trying too hard to look unbothered. Ava stood at the front in simple scrubs. No jacket, no rank on display, just her presence. She did not introduce herself with a resume. She pointed to the monitor. "Tell me what you see," she said. A resident started with jargon rapid and rehearsed. Ava held up a hand. "Tell me what matters," she said. The room adjusted, forced into clarity. When a resident talked over a nurse volunteer, Ava stopped him with a single look. "Listen," she said. The word was not a lecture. It was a command. In the trauma unit, word spread fast. The new trauma training director ran drills that made people sweat. She made chiefs and interns run the same scenario until their instincts improved. She forced residents to rotate through nursing roles in simulation to understand the difference between authority and function. In the ICU, Commander Riker improved slowly. He walked his first steps with a grimace and a physical therapist at his side. When he passed the trauma unit doorway, weeks later, he stopped long enough to catch Ava's eye. No salute this time. Just a nod between people who understood what the other had done. Ava returned the nod and went back to her work. In an office across town, Cameron Wexler sat in a waiting room under soft lighting that smelled faintly of lavender. The walls were decorated with stock photos of smiling faces and smooth skin. A receptionist called his name without looking up. He stood and adjusted his tie, hands trembling faintly as he followed her down a hallway lined with pamphlets. In a small room, a clinician in scrubs handed him a clipboard. "Please confirm the expiration dates on the saline in room 3, the clinician said, busy and distracted. Wexler stared at the clipboard as if it were an insult. His fingers shook as he wrote. Back at Summit Ridge, Ava walked into Trauma Bay 1 during a shift change and watched the new team take their positions. A resident checked breath sounds without being prompted. A nurse called out a vital trend and was answered, not dismissed. The room moved fast, but it moved with attention. Ava stood in the doorway for a moment, hand resting lightly on the frame. Her tremor fluttered, then steadied. The bay was loud, alive, and ready. She stepped inside.